all the startup funding in Japan, what percent do you think goes to female founders? Take a guess. One pet peeve of Japan is if you look at the lower house of the diet, is Japan 90% men? I don't think so last time I checked. Oh, actually, women have no desire to become a manager. To which I say, is that really true? What do they not want to become? We're not doing this for charity though. Objectively speaking, as an investor, why wouldn't you leverage this opportunity?
Hey there, and thank you for tuning in. We're excited to bring you another great conversation today. If you like the show and want to support us, please hit the subscribe button so we can keep bringing you great content week after week. And if you're feeling extra generous, give this video a like and share your thoughts and comments down below. Thank you so much. And now, let's get into it. Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today I have the pleasure to sit here in the studio with Kathy Matsui. Thank you so much for making time and coming to see us here in Osaka.
It's my pleasure.
You're an economist, and you're also co-founder of Empowers, which is a venture capital, all female-led, based in Tokyo. You had a long journey in economy. You worked for Goldman Sachs for over 2 decades. And one of the things you're very famous for is your research paper on womenomics. So we're going to have a lot to talk about today. And like with all our guests, I'm a little bit curious about your journey to Japan. You're originally from California, studied in the United States, but at some point something kind of drew you to come to Tokyo. What was it?
Well, my journey is frankly filled with serendipity. Although I had some kind of plan when I was young, where I would go, where I would live, where I would work, inevitably, plans don't always materialize. And that was certainly the case for me. So my parents are actually from Naraken, and they immigrated from Naraken to California in the early 1960s. Took 10 days by ship, by the way, from Yokohama port to California via Hawaii. And I was born the year after my mother immigrated. My mother immigrated a year after my father immigrated to the States. So born in the United States, I was automatically a U.S. citizen. I don't have any Japanese nationality. And I have 3 siblings. And I think similar to many first-generation immigrants, not just from Japan, but from all parts of the world that go to America, they left Japan mainly for economic reasons. They were farmers in Japan. My father had an opportunity to be an agricultural intern in America, in California, for 1 year. And when he returned from that experience, he realized, and this was not right after the war, but not that long after the war, that the difference between Japan and the United States was night and day, particularly when it came to scale of farming, right?
The space, the land.
The space, the land, and technology, all of that. So when my father returned from that experience to Naraken, despite the fact he was the eldest of 5 children, so you can imagine what the expectation was for him, was not to go anywhere, but to stay with the family farm and continue that. He made a very bold decision, which was to leave and to try this challenge of becoming a successful farmer in the United States. So I grew up with my parents working full-time, weekends included, for somebody else's farm in the beginning. And then my parents managed to secure a loan magically that allowed them to buy and purchase, I think at that time it was about 50 acres of land, which is a large size, in what is now, what is called Salinas Valley, which is in technically northern California. It's the home of John Steinbeck. So if you know East of Eden or Grapes of Wrath, Salinas is where John Steinbeck grew up. Cool. So I grew up in this very rural part of America, surrounded by other farming families, including my own. And my parents began growing chrysanthemums, kiku, right? Because that was a flower they grew in Japan. then realized that chrysanthemum wasn't that popular in America, maybe for graduations and funerals. So then my parents decided to pivot and switch to roses. And it wasn't just my family, but other surrounding Japanese immigrant farming families as well in that area. We all started growing roses. And during the 1980s, that area of Salinas Valley became the rose production capital of America.
Wow.
It was huge. All of us did very well. We rode that wave, right? I'm telling you a very long introduction, by the way. I know I'm not answering your question.
No, it's a super
but I just need to
interesting
give you
story.
this sort of context of how I grew up. It was going fine until it wasn't. Until America's rose market was kind of essentially under assault by imports from Latin America. Beautiful and very cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Roses were being imported from Latin America, causing huge pressure on the domestic rose market, including our family, our neighbors' families, rose businesses. And one by one, the rose farms around us started to go under or fail. And we were the very last ones standing, but one of the last ones kind of just trying to hang on. And at one point, despite many attempts to try to just save and hang on to the rose business, my father decided, I can't remember exactly how old he was, but he was in his early 60s at the time. He saw the writing on the wall that if he did not pivot again, the crop, the type of flower, he would just go the way the others went.
So
And
just like he pivoted from the chrysanthemum to
The
the roses,
roses.
he had to pivot again.
And this is a very big decision, right? Because we have very large scale. That by that time, I think it was 70 acres, even more land, all in greenhouses, right? Lots of infrastructure. And he had this idea, well, how can I still compete in flowers, but in a flower type that was going to be competitive, right? And until that point, we were growing what you call cut flowers, right? So the plants are in the soil and you cut them, right?
Okay.
And he decided that one floral product that would face limited competition from imports was potted orchids. And at the time in the United States, orchids were maybe kind of a luxury floral product. There wasn't that much supply. You'd only buy it if you really wanted to
For a special
give something
occasion.
as something special to a friend or whoever. You had to buy it in a florist shop as opposed to your grocery store. And I don't think it was just my father, but my father at the time thought, wait a minute, if we could breed more affordable, smaller scale orchids and sell them through channels like grocery stores, wouldn't that be more affordable and just easier to access? And that's how he broke into the US supermarket distribution. And then the business really started to take off. So I'm telling you this because my journey, I've seen my parents, especially my father, who's now deceased, but be challenged very hard. You would have said, why did you just give up and retire? But he kept going, even in his 60s. So I didn't pivot that much, but I also made a decision to kind of, pivot my career. But to go back to your original question of why I originally came to Japan, that was totally by accident. So once I graduated from Harvard, I had already applied and was accepted to a graduate program at Johns Hopkins in Washington, D.C. for graduate school. But I thought, well, going to school all my life, maybe I should just take a break. So I applied for what's called a Rotary Foundation Scholarship, which will allow you to study abroad for 1 to 2 years. And miraculously, I received a grant, a scholarship from my local Rotary clubs in California. And that scholarship was a unique one because it was specifically to study in Japan. And it was not the typical 1-year scholarship. They gave us 2 years. 1 year was for intensive Japanese language training. And the second year was, there were 14 of us. We were posted to different universities across Japan. And I got assigned, first of all, I was at IC. We were all at International Christian University in Tokyo. Second year, I was placed in Kobe Daigaku, Kobe University.
Okay, so very close to here.
Yes, and very close to, frankly, my family, my extended family, who were all in Japan, in Nara, and mostly in Nara, and some in Osaka. But that was the, I think, pivotal moment for me, not only because it was my first time to the land of my ancestry, and I think as a child of immigrant parents who left Japan for economic reasons, their number one motivation was look forward, not back. Get the kids educated the American way, speaking English. Don't need to bring them back to Japan to see the homeland and the relatives. Just move forward. And again, I think this is not at all unique, right? So I had some Japanese capability, meaning I could, comprehend my parents' Japanese when they were speaking at home, although it's all Kansai-ben.
Yeah.
So that was my first Nihongo was Kansai-ben. So when I first came to Tokyo and I started speaking, like, nukui toka hokasu toka ne, what was it? Iroira ne. They were like, people in Tokyo was like, what are you saying?
Where
are you from? What planet are you from? So it was a little bit of a culture shock when I first arrived in.
Was there any challenge for you, having grown up in rural California, in a family that kind of left Japan and was looking forward, for you to kind of be like, I want to go back in a way? I want to go and see where you are all from, where my family, my relatives are living?
I, of course, had some curiosity about why was I brought up this way? Where did my values come from? And another maybe interesting aspect, perhaps unusually for people who immigrate from Japan, is my parents were Christian in Naraken. Can you imagine that?
A very
like the
small
bedrock of
community, I guess.
Buddhism. So my parents converted to Christianity actually before they were married. And none of the other family members on either side were Christian. It's only my parents. So when they left and they went to America, no English, no money, they were drawn to the church. And because they happened to have this tiny Episcopalian church in Gojoshi, Naraken, they found an Episcopalian church, Seikokai, in what is now the Silicon Valley area. That's where I was born. My godparents were from that church. My siblings' godparents were from that church. And I can't remember a Sunday where we didn't go to church. That's how faithful my parents were. But it was also, for my parents, I believe, a tremendous support line for them. Fresh immigrants, not knowing about American culture, how to get around, what to buy at the supermarket, what not to buy at the supermarket, all of these things. The people at the church were incredibly supportive for my parents. And yeah, I don't think, I appreciated that when I was growing up, but looking back, that was really a tremendous gift that we were given. So, coming to Japan, it was more like I was curious. I just wanted to kind of open a few doors that I had not opened before and just learn a little bit. And of course, improve on my language, and of course, meet more of the relatives I'd heard about, seen photos, and maybe they'd come to America to visit, but other than, ohayo gozaimasu and oyasumi nasai, there wasn't a lot of conversation because neither of us could speak each other's language very well, right? But it was more curiosity that led me here as a ryugakusei. But I had no intention of staying and working. It was just, scratch that itch of curiosity and then go back and be on my merry way, go to graduate school and then work and live in the United States. That was the plan.
So what changed?
So during, I did go back to graduate school. And during the summer in between my 2 years of my master's program, Johns Hopkins, it's called the School of Advanced International Studies, had at the time an internship program, which is essentially sponsored by big Japanese corporations. And those corporations offered the students in the Japan Studies program, where I belonged to, summer internships. So I was assigned to Kyu Mitsui Ginko. So lots of mergers, but at the time there was a standalone Mitsui bank. And I believe I was the very first foreign intern at the headquarters, or maybe at the whole bank.
That must have been quite the experience.
In 1989, the summer of 89. So that was the peak of the Japanese asset bubble that I was there. I wore a uniform. I was in the capital markets swaps division. There was not a big team. We were maybe, 4 desks long. Men on this, mostly men, a few women, bucho at the end. And I learned so much in 3 months about Japanese corporate culture. It was fascinating. But what also happened was I met Jesper, who I know was a previous guest on your podcast. And Jesper also happened to attend Johns Hopkins, the same program. He was already in Japan, and he was actually helping to organize this internship program.
Oh.
So it was through that we met, but I still had 1 more semester to complete before I could graduate. So after that summer, I went back to Washington, D.C., completed my last semester, and then I bought a 1-way ticket.
And that was it.
And that was it. I had no job. All I knew was we wanted to be together. So that was it. So, 日本語で恋に落ちて
You kind of fell in place.
And so that was completely beyond any of my life plan, design. It just so happened. And so, had it not been for that experience, I definitely would not be here.
So, summer internship at Mitsui Bank, 1989, I believe you mentioned. When you described that first experience, some of the things you were talking about is already like the separation of how the men were seated versus where the women were seated, and the uniforms and the responsibilities. If we fast forward 10 years from that experience, 1999, that's when you publish your paper on womenomics, I believe. So in these 10 years, what are the experiences that kind of led you to consider and think about the role these women were playing in these Japanese companies and in Japanese society at large?
So for context, my job for 30 years was what is described as I was an equity market strategist. So I am a research analyst focused on analyzing the Japanese stock market. And of course, I have to have some macroeconomic knowledge. I have to analyze the listed companies in Japan and the overall picture. So my basic job was to give advice to our institutional clients in Japan and outside of Japan. Where's the Nikkei going to go? Up or down? And within that, should you buy auto companies, or should you buy pharma companies or retail companies, sector strategy? That was my job. But you can imagine in the 90s, after 1989, everything started to go south, right? So bad debts were crippling the banking system. Property prices were collapsing. The demographic kind of demise was just becoming apparent. And if you think about it, investing in an asset called equities or stocks, you must have at the core some basic hope for growth.
Yes.
If there's no expectation for growth, because equities are a risky asset, unlike cash or bonds, you wouldn't take that risk. But the question posed to me back then in the 90s, especially from our overseas clients, was, Kathy, tell me one good reason why I should invest in Japan. Because these overseas investors, right, maybe unlike my Japanese clients, had many other options. They didn't have to invest in Japan.
Singapore, Hong Kong, America,
China,
Europe.
right? So it was very hard to come up with positive argument, was the bottom line. Not just for me, for everybody in the market. So I gave birth to my son in the mid-90s. At the time, Goldman Sachs had a 4-month paid maternity leave across the world. I took my 4 months. Exactly after my 4 months was up, I returned to work full-time in the same job.
That's tough.
tough, but I actually was very excited to go back to work. I had enough, not had enough, but I was ready. But I looked around me and realized that I was one of the few who returned to their career full time. Many of my other mamatomo friends, of course, some of them opted to become full-time, sengyoshifu, stay-at-home moms. Totally respect that, right? But I had many other friends who, like me, wanted to return to their careers full-time, but for a whole host of reasons, found it very difficult, okay? So think of these two, my professional context, Kathy, why on earth, or where's growth going to come from? And then in my personal context, I saw this like talent pool not frankly being utilized to the extent that they could be.
Not participating.
Exactly. I just thought one word, that classic Japanese word, which is mottainai. So I thought, okay, I'm an analyst. I can play with numbers, drop scenarios. So my team and I, we decided, well, let's just do what if. What if, and at the time, Japan's female labor participation rate, which is the percentage of women who are working outside the home relative to the women who could work, was kind of in the mid 50 percentile, like 55, 56%. Definitely the lowest in the, say, G7. But what if that ratio could rise to, I don't know, the average of the advanced economies, or even higher, to match that of Japanese men, which by far was either number 1 or number 2 in the G7. All Japanese men work, right? So I just did the simple analysis and what it could do, because if you think about it, okay, so if more women worked outside the home, what does that do? That means more income to the household. More income to the household means more money to spend or consume. More consumption means more profits to companies providing services and goods.
Mm-hmm.
More profits means more wages, more consumption, i.e., this virtuous cycle, right? For everybody, not just, of course, for the women. So if you do the analysis or scenarios, obviously, this would boost GDP. And at the time, we estimated it could boost GDP by as much as 10%, which is a very big number,
it's a lot.
right? So I published this report in 1999, and many people asked, so what was the reception, right? It must have been so like groundbreaking. It wasn't. I think my foreign investors thought, wow, this is really interesting, right? But kind of interesting. And my domestic clients, who are, by the way, 99% Japanese men, I think they were polite and said, 面白いけど, where's the Nikkei going next week? That's what they really were interested in. What are gaijin toshika, what are foreign investors going to do, right?
It's interesting. It's not the mindset of like, oh, so if we do this, then the Nikkei will go up next week.
No. They just thought this is hypothetical. Mm-hmm. And we don't invest in hypotheticals, which totally understandable. So it wasn't really until 2013-14 when former Prime Minister Abe came to power the second time around, when, frankly, shocking to me and everybody else, he suddenly states in a speech, for Abenomics, which is the national growth strategy he put forth, to succeed, we need womenomics. I fell out of my chair. Everybody in this kind of diversity space fell out of their chairs, because this is the very first time that the concept of diversity was even uttered at the national level, right? And I think I don't want to say it's all credit to the government and Prime Minister Abe, but what it did do, I think, was shift the context of gender diversity out of, let's just call it, human rights and equality, to a context of gender diversity is imperative for growth, for business growth, for economic growth, for the nation, which is a very different context, right? Because I think in the former, equal rights and equality, human rights and equality, if you cared about that sort of stuff, you might care about gender diversity. But frankly speaking, in this country, in many countries, that's a small minority group of people. But if you move that context of diversity into this broader realm of economic relevance, this is an economic imperative. If Japan wants to grow, put another way, if you want to run a marathon, it's probably easier to run a marathon on 2 legs rather than 1. Simple, right?
And then people started getting it.
Then people said, okay. And then I think it wasn't instant, but it slowly became part of the vernacular, right? More mainstream.
And then, of course, the government started also implementing some policies to kind of make adjustments. And one of those was to, I believe, set a sort of quota. They had a goal to have, I think it was 30% of female leadership.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly a quota. It was a goal.
A goal of 30% female leadership by 2020, which they have now postponed to 2030, which is approaching in a few years. So the direction seems to be there. The progress seems to be slow. What is kind of preventing more implementations of those ideas and to not only become laws, but actually become part of how the society, the company operates?
So I think one, first of all, before we talk about the obstacles, there has been some significant progress, maybe not apparent to everybody, particularly outside Japan. Number one, big progress was that ratio of women working outside the home I mentioned earlier, started at 56% back in 1999. By the year 2015-16, had exceeded 70%. I think near its peak was close to 72%. So 72% of Japanese women, record high, were working outside the home. By the way, that number surpassed both the United States and the EU.
Oh, wow.
Okay? So at least in quantitative terms, there was tremendous progress. Right? Record numbers of Japanese women were working outside the home. Number two, if you recall, back in the 90s in particular, there were a lot of complaints by society. Oh, the women can't work because they got to take care of the kids. There's not enough daycare spots, right? Taikijido, right? That waiting list was very, very long. Well, actually, the government significantly increased capacity of daycare. And now I read a recent article, it's at a record low, the number of kids waiting for a daycare spot, okay? Number three, and this is very important, was the issue of transparency. Very few countries have this law, and many people outside Japan do not realize Japan has this law. In 2015, there was a law called the Female Employment Promotion Law, Josei Katsuyaku Suishin Ho, which was promulgated. And what did that do? That forced organizations, public and private, with 300 or more employees to disclose their gender statistics. This included gender pay gaps. First time, okay? And it highly encouraged them to these organizations to set gender-related goals for the future, okay? So I always said in the past, you can't move the needle if you do not know where that needle lies. So this requirement to at least disclose what percentage of female managers do you have? What percentage of female directors on your board do you have? We didn't know this before because there was no disclosure requirement.
Yeah, no data available on any company.
And okay, targets are not quotas. Fair. But at least having a target is better than no target at all, in my view. And again, while we're still very, very far where we need to be in leadership representation, I think at least, like I said earlier, it's now part of the conversation. And I don't need to mention the fact that Japan is running out of people. So what other option do you have?
Well, you can invite people from overseas, or you can get all the people that are not working to kind of participate in the workforce.
Easier said than done, I think, on both fronts, right? And I think one of the challenges we still have in Japan is that I said a record number of women are working now, but half of those women still today are working not full-time, but part-time jobs, which is fine. But if you think about kind of growing into a leadership position, manager or director level, it probably takes a lot more longer in a part-time capacity as opposed to a full-time. So there's also, part of that could be just their desire not to work full-time, but there's also probably if I go full-time, then who's going to take care of everything else, right? So there's that question, but there's also the 自分自身の their own self-motivation. Do they want to become a senior leader or a manager? And there's tons of surveys published all the time in this country. Oh, actually, women have no desire to become a manager. That's pretty much the answer, right? Across the board. To which I say, is that really true?
Who's behind those surveys?
Well,
Who's being surveyed?
What do they not want to become? They do not want to become the manager who looks like they haven't slept. They're essentially married to their companies. They have no personal life. They have to sacrifice everything for their employer. That doesn't even look fun, no matter how much you get paid, right? So one thing and this is the reason I published this book in 2019, 女性社員の育ち方, was really to direct it at employers based on my own experience as a manager, albeit for a foreign company, but I managed, a lot of people, not just in Japan, but across Asia. Frankly, more men than women, but quite a few women. And some of the differences I noticed as a manager, like women, when you give them a promotion opportunity, they say, okay, let's take an example. Here's a promotion opportunity. There are 10 criteria to succeed at this role. And this has happened to me. I had a male and a female direct report. They're equal rank, equal performance quartile. The female would look at that list of 10 and she would say, I only have 8 out of 10. Only 8 out of 10. So too early for me. Ask somebody else. The guy, and I'm going to be very generalistic here, but it happened to me. He'll look at the list and he'll say, these are not equally weighted. The top 3 criteria are definitely the most important to succeed in this role. I've got the top 3. Choose me. So I have many of these sorts of anecdotes that I've experienced myself. And again, it's obviously anybody's choice to want to be promoted, to become a manager, or whatever. But I also talk a little bit about what people don't talk about in Japan, which is how not just exciting and interesting and fun it is to be a manager, or to be somebody who's actually at the decision-making level of your organization, because you can see how your everyday actions and decisions can affect the whole, right? And that is not too many people talk about. All they do is talk about the bad side, the negative side. And of course, was it hard? Did I spend a lot of time, traveling? Did I have to sacrifice my family? Of course I did. But net, would I have given, that opportunity up? No way. And I was stretched, I was challenged. And when you're stretched and challenged, and I've obviously failed many, many times, but with that comes growth, right?
This jump from being in a position at the company to a managerial position, this is often where people refer to as there might be a glass ceiling for women. In a TED talk you gave a few years ago, you said there are no glass ceilings, there's just a thick layer of men. How true is that still today?
Well, look at Japan. Look at the government. That's my one pet peeve of Japan is if you look at the lower house of the Diet. Okay, it's a little bit higher than it was, but I think it's 12, 13%. Mm-hmm. It's been around 10% for about 70 plus years. Is Japan 90% men society? I don't think so, last time I checked. But this most important decision-making body of the land is making critical decisions about what? Our geopolitical, national security, food security, energy security, many things that are going to affect everybody in Japan. So you cannot have this imbalanced decision-making body. So I'm on the record for saying I believe at the political level, particularly at that level, there should be some kind of quota. Maybe, I mean, you can do it many different ways. Look, at many countries have different approaches, but at least at the party level, that you need to, put forth diverse candidates. Doesn't have to be women only, but mainstream candidates. We need to have more representation of what's more reflective of broader Japanese society. I don't know why that doesn't resonate with more people, but I think maybe people just grow numb that this is the way it is, shikata ga nai. But I've also met some very young, ambitious female wannabe politicians. They have incredible ideas because they see around them all these problems that they want to solve, like tomorrow, right? So give them a chance. But this current structure doesn't really give diverse candidates and young ones a chance, right?
Quotas are sometimes kind of debated with pros and cons. And that being said, there are sometimes...
Is that me or...
It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Quotas are sometimes discussed with like a lot of pros and cons. And you mentioned that you were on a record for saying it in this context, but you're not always in favor. In that same TED
I'm not
talk,
in favor just to be clear, I'm in favor of it in the political kind of public sector. I think it's more challenging in the private sphere.
One example you gave in the TED talk was the case of Norway, I believe, where quotas were implemented. But what happened is this has led to having a generation of women in these leadership positions becoming role model for the next generation and kind of breaking down a little bit that ceiling and making it, normalizing it that, okay, well, everyone can be part of that leadership.
Yeah. And so, again, to me, I prioritize the political sphere because that is so important in terms of kind of dictating or trickling down for the rest of society, right? And there's so many, for example, Japan is one of the few nations on the planet where women cannot choose their surnames. Is that not ridiculous? But there are women in this country, women policymakers in this country who are opposed to this. It is what it is what it is. So if we don't speak out, and particularly for the young people in this country, the future is in their hands, right? So we obviously need more engagement, but we need, let's say, less complaining and finger pointing and more people taking action.
When people do take actions, and say in the field of politics, new policies are implemented and so on, realistically, how much time does it take for the effects of those to actually be visible? So, for example, your research paper on womenomics that was picked up by the Abe administration, they started making some changes, and you mentioned some of the data that today the childcare have the lowest waiting lines and the workforce participation was at the highest and so on and so forth. But when these policies are made, often we see people kind of complaining a few months later, like, oh, this was done, but nothing changed. Realistically, what's the time frame that we need to look at these changes to get a good idea of whether or not they are bringing the positive requirements that we want?
So obviously, it doesn't happen overnight. However, I think one of the beauties of Japan, which is relatively speaking, quite a homogenous society, is that, I always say this, it takes a long time to make a decision, to form a consensus to make that decision. But once you make that decision, because everybody thinks very similarly, change can happen overnight, right? So I think change can happen much faster than most people anticipate, but you have to explain it in a way that makes rational sense, right? So to me, I've tried to approach this whole topic from an objective perspective, mainly from an empirical perspective, using data, using statistics. Like there's this whole myth about, oh, but if more women work, we will have even less babies. That's the kind of mainstream view. But I looked at this internationally. It's not true. In fact, those countries with more women working had higher birth rates, fertility rates, than those that were low. And even in Japan, I mapped out the 47 prefectures.
Okay.
Also, there's a positive correlation between female participation rates and fertility.
So the regions in Japan with the women that are working the most are the ones that have the most children as well.
Read my research. So I'm not trying to be combative. I'm just trying to say, before we debate these points, let's establish what's fact versus fiction. That's all I'm saying. And I think finally, this point about, it's imperative for growth, and Japan is desperately in need of growth, right? And it's desperately in need of innovation, right? And where's that innovation going to come from if you're all thinking the same? You all went to the same school. You're reading the same media. So if your economy is going like this, you probably don't need diversity, right? But Japan is not going like this anymore. It's going like this or like this. So that's when you need to rethink the kind of fundamental basis for what direction are you headed, right?
Is this why you've decided after over 2 decades at Goldman Sachs to kind of maybe step away from the research side of things and go into venture capitalism with M Powers to kind of empower these women?
Yeah. So my two co-founders, Yumiko Murakami and Miwa Seki, we have been long-term girlfriends. All three of us worked in the Japanese public equity market, i.e. big company space, for many, many years. But we're mothers, and we simply thought to ourselves, with the next chapter of our lives, what do we want to dedicate ourselves to? And the bottom line was we saw a lot of potential in Japan. But to realize that potential, there needed to be some catalyst. And we thought, we have experience in finance. We have knowledge and expertise about what is now under the rubric of ESG, governance, gender diversity, climate impact. And also, we were really interested in creating a future for Japan that is brighter, where innovation is the spark for growth. So we decided to combine these things in a way that hopefully we could create some impact, albeit in a very small way. So in 2021, we launched Empower Partners Fund 1 with $150 million US. We were the first female-led GP or fund like this of this size in Japan. And we decided it would be an ESG, environment, social governance, focused or integrated VC fund that was global. So we don't only invest in Japan, we also invest overseas. But the common thread throughout all of our investments are companies that are offering or providing innovative solutions to some of society's largest challenges. And those challenges could range from labor shortages to lower productivity, to inequality, sustainability, climate tech, healthcare, et cetera. So we're pretty sector agnostic. And so for Fund 1, we now have 22 companies. About 70% are Japanese, and the rest are overseas. It's like we've adopted these children. They're not children, but in our family of Empower. And we're just so honored and blessed to be part of all of their journeys. They all are different, relatively different stages, but we do focus on middle to later stage. And our, what we call value add proposition that we provide to these founders is to, of course, help them scale. But we also want to, in many ways, help them cross the border. So to go global. Both ways, for Japanese startups to help them go global, and also for overseas startups to come to the Japanese market.
How has that change been for you, spending so much time in research and now kind of working directly with those founders and kind of seeing those innovation opportunities and be like, okay, we actually have the means to support and create the change
Yeah.
that you've been advocating for so long?
So it's been thrilling, challenging, going from working as an employee for a large organization to becoming, essentially your own boss for the three of us. Learning experience the entire journey, but my goodness, it's been such a fun ride. We learn something new every day, if not from founders who are pitching to us, from our team, all of whom are very young, teaching us like what we don't know about many things in this very high technology and new world that we're entering, AI, deep tech, life science. But to us, we're growing every day. And this main fund, we do not have a gender lens, so we don't look for female founders only. We look for wonderful, best companies we can invest in. But it just so happens, coincidentally, that 40% of our portfolio are female or minority founder-led. And I can guarantee you that is the highest ratio of any VC fund in Japan. And through this experience of Fund 1, because we're three females, you can imagine we got a lot of female founders approaching us, knocking on our door. The problem or the challenge for us was many of them are very early stage, like seed stage or very early in their business journey or evolution, while our main fund is focused on middle to later stages, I mentioned earlier. So stage fit wasn't there. But we thought many of these founders had terrific businesses with tremendous potential, and their valuations, frankly, were very reasonable. But they were struggling with raising capital. So in March of this year, we launched Japan's very first women-focused early stage fund called W Power. And since then, this is led by my colleague Miwa Seki. It has been very, very busy for that team because it was like the floodgates open, right? And that fund is thankfully backed by Tokyo Metropolitan Government, by Mitsubishi Bank, Shionogi Pharmaceutical here in Osaka, and other partners. And we are all aligned in this mission to help empower these female founders. And a question for you. So of all the startup funding in Japan, what % do you think goes to female founders? Take a guess.
If I have to give an honest guess, I would say between 5 and 10%.
Too high.
Too high. Wow.
Try 2%.
2%.
Now then you'll say, but there are not that many female founders, right? According to the government statistics, about a third of Japan's entrepreneurs are female.
But they're not being funded.
Or they find other means.
Or bootstrap.
Yeah. So this gap between this apparent 1/3 of all founders are female to only 2% get access to startup funding, that should not be, right? And so we're not doing this for charity, though, because what we see is tremendous opportunity to invest in very promising businesses with massive potential, but they're just not getting attention. And if we can help them on their journey to grow, and we can exit at a nice, premium, objectively speaking, as an investor, why wouldn't you leverage this opportunity?
With womenomics, that's basically what you argued for. You argued that by investing in women, by having them participate in the workforce, GDP will grow. There will be a positive economic impact for everyone. Now you're basically showing them, okay, well, look, we have 40% founders as part of our Fund 1. Now we have a female fund. We have all these women that have brilliant ideas, companies that are generating revenue and kind of help you grow as well. And you have the attention of other venture capital firms, of other banks and so on. Do you feel like they are now paying attention? now that you're kind of leading the way with your co-founders with Empower, and to be like, oh, actually, well, we are missing out on opportunities by not investing in these?
I believe so. We believe so. But we need more champions to join this, adventure. Because we are only one fund. We only have a limited amount of capital. We hope there will be more investors who focus on this space because, again, half the society is of another gender. And if you're an investor, you want to maximize opportunities across the entire opportunity set, not half, right? It only makes economic sense, to do so.
You mentioned that Japan is one of those few countries where it takes a long time for people to reach a consensus, but once a consensus is reached, change can happen fast. What will it take to tip the balance, to make it so that it's not just a theory, it's not just a research, that the facts are accepted and that it's like, we need to do something about it, like today?
Well, I think we already have growing pieces of evidence that diversity does drive innovation, right? I think the Keidanren many years ago published even a report that highlighted the decisions or actions taken by females at these very large blue chip companies resulted in these business ideas that were very profitable, right? So I don't think much more needs to be kind of written or analyzed about that. I think at the entrepreneurial level, what we're aiming to prove is this hypothesis that I described earlier, which is if you invest in women founders or diverse founders, you have a tremendous economic opportunity in front of you. This is not charity. Just objectively speaking, this is a untapped investment opportunity. And if we can demonstrate to the world that the returns on this investment are high, naturally that will speak volumes and help lure more people and capital to this opportunity. At least that's our hope.
So what would you say to all the young women or women in the workforce that have these dreams and that feel like they're facing this glass ceiling or thick layer of men to overcome this and to kind of go after what they want, to contribute the way they believe they can have a positive impact?
Well, entrepreneurship is certainly not for every woman or everybody, but I would say that for women who feel confined, limited, trapped, working for somebody else in a organization, entrepreneurship is one option for jikokote, like your self-realization. You are the master of your own destiny. If your former employer did not have great, parental leave policies, well, you make them yourself. Now, I'm not, though, discounting how tough it is to be an entrepreneur. Absolutely. It's a very, very tough journey. But if you're of that mindset that you think you have an idea, you have a problem you want to solve, that pain point is deep and wide, and you've got colleagues and friends who want to ride with you in that journey, I would say, please go for it.
Did you think this paper you wrote in 1999 will bring you here today on this long journey?
Not at all. Not at all. And it was never intended to be some kind of piece of national policy or anything like that. It was just a research paper. Keep in mind, I was competing for my entire career as an analyst against strategy teams at Nomura, Daiwa, Mitsubishi, who had teams much bigger. And basically, I was the only woman strategist in the market for 3 decades. So the whole name of the game for an analyst is, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you get clients to vote for you? Because it's basically a voting thing, right? And I kind of knew that my competitors probably wouldn't write about this topic. I thought it'd be kind of interesting. And that was all it was about. It was like, make people think, what if, right? What if? So again, like everything in my life, or pretty much everything in my life, very serendipitous journey.
Serendipitous journey starting in the flower fields of California.
And can I add one more thing if we still have time? So another, outside of my work, that I've devoted much of my time and attention to is, in my case, I was a first-generation university entrant in my family. Actually, my three siblings and me, 4 kids in the family. My parents only went to high school in Japan. So I know firsthand the power of higher education. Okay? But I also know how lucky the few of us are to access higher education, right? So I have served on the board of an institution called the Asian University for Women that is based in Chittagong, Bangladesh for 17 years now. It started in 2008. And the mission of this university is to educate women with tremendous potential but lack of opportunity from mainly South Asia and parts of the Middle East. So students at AUW include Afghan students rescued from the Taliban, Rohingya refugees, former garment factory workers. And you think, but their education level must be pretty low. And this university, the language of instruction is English. So they have to have some proficiency in English. But I can assure you, those women are out there. And AUW recruits them. And many of these women go on to graduate work, graduate studies, Oxford, Cambridge, Columbia, Stanford. And many of them return to their communities to work in refugee camps. They were a refugee themselves. They're now working for UNHCR at the refugee camps.
And they're becoming the role models for the next generation of women to
exactly.
kind of
so to me, seeing, I feel I'm not just feeling it. I know that I'm tremendously lucky, tremendously blessed, and I'm Christian, so I believe that God had a plan for me. I also went through a very severe health crisis when I was 36, and I survived that. I have a responsibility to leave the world a better place than when, I leave it. So to me, AUW is fulfilling a mission and a dream that I know so many young women have, but that will never be realized just because they cannot access that opportunity. So anybody in Japan, we have a group in Tokyo that is supporting these women, raising money for scholarships. I know I'm doing this pitch, but I'm going to be shameless about this. We desperately need supporters, and we have tremendous supporters from big Japanese corporations, and lots of individuals, but we always need more. So,
and we will make sure to put the links in the description.
Yes, please do.
So
Thank you so
people can
much.
find this and some of your work and research.
Yeah.
Kathy, thank you so much for coming and making time to share your insights, your story, and your passions about how women can have a positive impact and change the course of society. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll be back in the next episode. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future conversations. And we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this episode, here are a couple more that we think you'll enjoy. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you next time.